Rama Jaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjalian Tiwarang Ayajata Santi Dasata Paraja Kajatika Dese Dudama Hanukampi Mampacha.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So greetings again. I would dearly love to speak with each of you individually, but here we are. We've been in lockdown since mid-March, but we're also on a winter retreat. So I think most of you know that the Ajahn monasteries in the Northern Hemisphere practice a winter retreat from January, February, and March. So it's a kind of self-lockdown. So we just sort of continue on. And monasteries are very well suited to lockdowns. In fact, we've been self-isolating in some various fashions for 2,600 years. So we have quite an advantage. Fortunately, lay people come and they bring food, but we don't have any guests right now. We have 5 bhikkhus, 1 samanera, 1 anagarika, and 4 laymen, and it's a nice sized community. So what to talk about? Well, first of all, we all send our blessings and hope this time of uncertainty is fruitful for you. Can't be easy. Something so terribly new. We've never seen anything like this. I wanted to talk about the sort of evolution of practice that many of us have experienced. I think in a similar way. When I as a child, I would sometimes have experiences of deep silence, infrequent but significant. And I think that's something that's not uncommon for human beings, especially those of us who are on a path that for some reason we touch something which is profoundly different. It's not the same as excitement or success. It's something profoundly silenced, and it kind of stays with us. Sometimes you get that on a retreat. Sometimes it just comes to you, and you can't kind of deny that experience or that whatever it was. And there's a kind of seeking in us, and perhaps we have a memory of that from childhood that we don't even know about. But in any case, I know for myself there was this seeking of that, but I was always looking for it as an external experience, and I didn't realize how to get there. So I was going somewhere to get this experience. And then in university, I had a Danish friend who gave me a book. This would have been, I think, around 1967, way back. A book called, I think, The Psychology of Awareness. I don't even remember the author. And that was the first time I heard about awareness as a spiritual practice. And I thought, that's the key, isn't it? The key to silence is not so much an external experience, is awareness of experience. And that's a huge shift in human consciousness. Many people don't make that shift usually. We make that shift when we begin to see the difference between me having some kind of emotional reaction to something and then noticing I'm having an emotional reaction, or me feeling disappointed by something and believing in the disappointment and blaming someone or whatever. And the difference being then I notice disappointment as an object, and that's awareness. And that is so basic to the spiritual life, so basic that When I see people who have a lot of opinions about spiritual life or whatever, but they're not aware of it, I realize they don't have that basic requisite of Buddhism. And the basic requisite is to awaken to the way things are, to know how it is. So even if you are having a difficult meditation, you know it's a difficult meditation, don't you? Or you're having a good meditation. And that knowing is neither good nor indifferent or bad. It is something behind. And that is reinforced in our practice again and again and again. And why is it reinforced? Because we forget. And how do we forget? Well, we just get absorbed into experience. So I found that, like as a young student and as a young traveler, even though I had that book and it made sense to me, I would only kind of realize awareness maybe every 3 months. I would get lost in my experiences. And then every 3 months I'd notice, wow, you're really whatever. You're really upset, or you're really happy, you're really sad. I'd awaken to the way things are. So even though it was a simple teaching, the habits of my mind, the compulsions of my thinking processes, the emotions which I hadn't processed skillfully, and so on and so forth, they were so compelling that my attention was always out into experience, into thought, into emotion, into coming and going. But every now and then I notice, whoa, you're really restless, or you're really upset, and that awakening process, the way Ajahn Chah talked about it, many of you read that, it's like the dripping of a faucet. The water drips, 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 until it's a really powerful flow of awareness or of water. And that takes a long time. That takes a long, long time. At least for me, maybe for some adepts who are, really, really precocious, it doesn't. But I know when I finally made it to Thailand, and my difficulties that I had with anger or greed or whatever it was, the same difficulties we all have, I felt so pathetic. I felt so unable to do it. It felt so impossible. How am I going to be aware of this stuff and not react through it? And that's the beauty of older teachers, that they can say to you, hang in there, keep going, this will change, just keep developing Bharami, keep practicing. And I was so grateful that Ajahn Chah gave me the confidence to work through the very real difficulties I was facing. He couldn't do it for me. He couldn't say, well, he had no magic formula or magic technique, but he could say, this will work. Awareness will work. If you just stay with it, awareness will. And that was a big thing. That was a very, very big thing. So that building of confidence, I think, is part of the evolution of anyone's practice. The confidence and awareness to understand and to deal with life's problems, but one's inner world. And as we work in this path, I think that confidence and awareness just becomes so powerful that it is unassailable, can't be knocked over. But in the beginning, like when I was a student, it got knocked over a lot. And even though my intention was to awaken, it wasn't that easy. So then when I got into the monastery and began to have a lifestyle, I began to say, okay, that's important. And I think we all do that in the beginning, don't we? We begin to clean up our lifestyles. We begin to have lifestyles which are much, much more moral, much less distracted. And one thing that happens there, I think, for all of us, is we lose a lot of friends because we become much less interesting for people who are very externalized. We're not interested in shopping. We're not interested in all the things that people seem to be interested in. And we begin to develop Kalyanamitta. Usually it's fewer people, but they're really very important. And I think the development of the spiritual life, very important, Kalyanamitta. That if we have 2 or 3 or 4 friends, or a sangha of friends who can always model for us the direction we should be going, because sometimes our mind doesn't want to go in that direction. So the building of a community, the building of Kalyanamitta, is the evolution of not only one's own practice, but the evolution of a culture of practice, which carries you, doesn't it? Like, so if someone is going through a divorce, or they're having like the COVID thing is really stressing them out, you have a whole community which is saying to you, it's okay, practice meditation, how can we help you, and so on. And so for me, the Kalyanamitta, obviously, were very good teachers and a Sangha. And then there comes a time when the practice, you begin to have more awareness. And I found that one of the things that I didn't understand when I began to have more sustained awareness was the desire to control. So the negative emotions which I experienced, the anger and fear and resentment and all, all these different things we have as human beings, I tried to control them. And I think that's a common part of the practice, where I would do metta bhavana in order to control anger. I would do asubha kamatan in order to control lust, or I would do whatever it was. But it was always from a sense of desire to get rid of. Now, it was good to do that because it gave me alternative thought patterns. It helped, but still, the practice wasn't one of awakening to anger. It was I have to sort this anger out. I have to fix it. I must stop being angry. So the problem was I still took it personally. I still thought it's my anger. It's my problem. I have to do something in order not to be angry. Now, that was better than before, where I'd just be angry. That was no good at all, right? But now I was at least taking responsibility. But then there was still the craving and the self-identity. I am someone, I have got too much anger, I have an anger problem. And so I took it very personally, and then I would do things. And then that was, of course, good in some way, but it wasn't really liberating the mind from anger. And then through that struggle, I would use techniques. And this is one thing that I think we all do in the beginning. We use techniques. We do, I think of metta bhavana and so on and so forth. But all the time for me, I don't know about for you, who've been practicing a while, there's always a sense of me doing something to get somewhere. And then I would go back to the teaching and say, where is that silence? I'd go back to my own experience. What was that silence about? And how does that relate to the Buddha's experience of silence or liberation? And then that language that the Buddha offered us, there is the timeless, the unconditioned, the uncreated, the timeless. I'd come back to, if it's timeless, I can't, if my practice is doing something now to get something later, that's in time. That can't be it. And so all my techniques that I used, I saw a lot of them were me doing something now to get a result later. Like walking meditation. I think a lot of us, when we started walking meditation, I'd walk back and forth and I'd be determined not to think, and I'd be a failure every time. I'd start at one end and I'd say, I'm not going to think, and I'd concentrate on my feet, and I was just trying to control the mind. I wasn't really awakening to the mind. And that difference took quite a while to understand. But little by little, I began to see, awareness feels like this is different than I should not be aware. That's not awareness. When I say I should not be angry, I mean, I shouldn't be angry, I shouldn't be fearful, I've got an anger problem. That's not awareness. I mean, you're angry, you're fearful, but you're not really aware of it as an object, you're still the subject. And that difference, that movement towards awakening to it just as it is quite difficult, because we don't want anger, we don't want fear, we want to be good people. And so these moods and emotions can be very, very threatening. So what happened to me was that I had some very powerful emotions I had to deal with, like any monk had to, but also conjoined with that, I was starting to do a lot of good works. So the surrender to the monastery, the upataka of the teacher, the gratitude for what is offered to me, all of that began to build a character which could then deal better with these negative emotions. And that's a part of the practice where we build character. We build the wholesome qualities of character, the barami, by just being more patient in a traffic jam or being more forgiving. And that evolution is also very, very slow, I found, very, very slow. But slowly, the balance began to be changed from one who is just selfishly always following his own moods to one who now reflects, contemplates, and begins to build character which embodies awareness and strengthens awareness. And that's what character building is in a spiritual life. It's not building a personality which is charming and charismatic, and it's not worldly in that way. Some people wouldn't even notice that you have a strong character maybe. But the character we're building is not based on ego. It's not based on success. It's not based on showing off or something. It's based on really, really solid values which will help you be more aware, more mindful, more aware of the way things are. So one of the things I always talk about with monks or whoever is that simple recommendation for the monks to be content with little. That was a fabulous reflection that Ajahn Chah would say, well, this is the food that's offered. Lay people are doing their very best to offer it. It wasn't as luxurious food that I was used to, but I could see that if I could go to contentment with little, it would help me a lot with greed. And so I began to contemplate that as an attitude. Now, in the beginning, I would say to myself, you must be content with little. You should not be greedy. But that was more ego. That was much more ego. So then I began to see the difference between egotistical judgment of greed, say, and awakening to greed, feeling the greed, and then shifting my mind to another perception. And I found, oh, now that's skillful. If I can do that. So the first thing was to awaken to the greed or the anger or the fear and recognize it. Yeah, this is greed, or this is anger, or this is resentment, or this is anxiety. And it feels that way. But then I could shift my thinking or my attention. I could shift it to my body. I could shift my thinking to, the Buddha recommended be content with little. I try to be content with little. And little by little, the perceptions of greed began to be disempowered because my mind was shifting to other perceptions, other ways of viewing. But it wasn't egotistical. It wasn't like me trying to become a person that wasn't greedy. You see, so it wasn't based on becoming, it was always based on timelessness. So when I awaken to something like greed or resentment, say, it's a timeless awakening. I'm not trying to do something now so I'm not resentful in the future. No, I wake up and I say, oh, the resentment's really strong. It feels this way. And then if my mind is thinking resentful thoughts, I can say, oh, that's a resentful thought. What if I think something else? May all beings be free from suffering. So it's totally in awareness and it's totally present. And it's not about becoming. And so with that lays the foundation for presence, a timeless presence, and still working with the negativity or that strength evolved, I should say. Then there comes a time where I think all of us no longer feel so threatened by the negative emotions, and the barami and the character of awareness begins so strong that we can just notice these old patterns which have been there for 40 years or whatever, and say, oh, that's just an old pattern. It's not a threat. It's not bad. And I don't have to do anything about it. It just is as it is. And there, I think what happens is then you become much more curious about the knowing rather than the objects of knowing. And that movement for outwards to objects and trying to sort them out and trying to be a better person is good. It's a good thing to do. But at some point you realize, oh, wait a minute, what is anatta about? And what is the Buddha pointing to when he says timeless, not conditioned, here and now? And that language becomes a kind of language of curiosity. You become curious about that, and you use your questioning mind to say, well, what is it that doesn't change? And what is timeless? And you begin to see that awareness itself is significant. You begin to be aware of awareness. You begin to be aware that you're aware. And it doesn't matter what you're aware of. It doesn't matter if your emotions are negative or positive. It doesn't matter if the weather's good or bad or indifferent. Yeah? And every time you get lost into thought, into self-thought, and you do get lost, don't you? You know, you kind of get the insight, but then you get lost again, and then every now and then you awaken. You awaken. And what's very important is to say this moment of awakening is what I've been looking for. Not some experience of happiness or getting rid of happiness. It's this awakening which I'm looking for. That is the goal. And the rest will take care of itself. And if you make that the goal, that awakened mind, it will be in the, you know, you might have, like, you might feel very, like, let's say this whole virus thing brings up a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty is a very powerful state of mind. Uncertainty can be no threat. Uncertainty can be interesting. How can I build something? How can I make something? Fine. I want to go traveling. How will it be? Oh, it'll be interesting. But uncertainty can be very frightening. What's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to the economy? Is my business going to go belly up? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, all of that's uncertain. Now, you can take uncertainty as an object of awareness. And when you can say to yourself, uncertainty feels this particular way, then you've awoken to uncertainty. And that doesn't mean that you don't plan or you don't do anything, but you begin to see the background is uncertainty, has a certain feeling. But the awareness knows. And the awareness is stillness, and the awareness has no quality. It is neither certain or uncertain. It can be with confidence, it can be with doubt. It can be with both of those. So on a worldly level, we need to deal with uncertainty. So all of us are, like the monastery is trying to figure out, when are we going to have guests? And I'm figuring out, is William going to come and ordain as a samanera from Singapore? And he's probably thinking, is it going to be safe? And Karina's probably thinking, am I going to come and do some cooking for my hubby who's going to be a samanera? Or whatever might happen, we don't know. We don't know. Huge. And the possibility of freedom is all the time, whatever happens in the future. And so we're doing two things, I think. We're doing worldly dharmas. We're trying to be moral. We're trying to do good things and organize the monastery for us and trying to figure out how we can have guests coming in and be safe and so on. But all the time, our spiritual practice is primary. If you make awareness primary, everything else will do the best it can. If you make the worldly dharmas primary, you're always caught by other things, contingencies, which are bigger than you. And that's what I found with my own practice. In the complexities I face now as a monk, or it's much less complex than your life, but the complexities I face, if I always just look at, like, okay, this complexity is making me anxious, and I go to the anxiety, say, anxiety is this way, then I've taken refuge. And from that, I have to make decisions, I have to act, but I'm aware of where I'm coming from and what's happening. Now, the more you do that, the more we do this, the more the urgency of the negative emotions overwhelms us, and the more we begin to intuit that silence, which is always there, which I tried to indicate in the beginning of the meditation. Right? It's no big deal, actually, but it is a big deal because our minds are so distracted. So if you begin to appreciate that silence and realize it's not something you have to get, it's something you notice, and then you turn to that more and more. This isn't a virus cough, honest. It's a cough. I'm in the workshop too much. So it's actually sawdust. I'm all right, honest. Don't send the doctors. But if you kind of just remind yourself all the time, whatever it's like, then you begin to see the wonderfulness of this silence, that it's always there, it's always available. And then the emotions don't overpower you. You still have to bear with them. You have to bear with your karma. It comes up, but you no longer believe in it. It's not a problem. It's not who you are. You're not a bad person. You're not a good person either. Personality comes and goes, but that silence does not come and go. And this is the wonder of the Buddha's realization. He pointed to that. We live in an objective world. We have objective experiences. We live in the five khandhas. The five khandhas are kind of, we talk a lot about the five khandhas, but they're not liberation. So the reason we talk about the khandhas is not that we understand them thoroughly, it's just that don't go there. Don't try to find stillness in movement. But notice that within movement, there's stillness. Huh? That within the movement of the breath and the movement of thought even, there's a stillness behind that. And this is, I think, what I sense the evolution of our spiritual life is about. It's evolving towards that. And the rest will take care of itself. Because in that, if you get confidence in that, you get a kind of joy, not an emotional joy, but I say a joy which comes from confidence that, yeah, that's my real home. You come home. And what Ajahn Chah was talking about, yeah, that's my real home. I don't have to go anywhere. And yet you have to go somewhere. You have to go shopping or whatever. But it's really not so important. It is important, but it's not so important because you found your real home. And that sense of finding your home, isn't that what we're seeking? What we're seeking, I think, is not. What we're seeking is the end of desire. We're not seeking an object. When you are seeking an object, what are you doing? You're trying to put an end to desire. That's what I think we're seeking. And coming home to that silence is the end of desire. That's our real home, and that's where desire ends. No objective experience will put an end to your desire because it'll change. But you can enjoy yourself. You can have a good meal and watch too many movies during this COVID. Okay, but that's just happiness. There's nothing wrong with happiness. But the end of desire, desirelessness, that you find in the heart of silence. And that, when you get that, then desire becomes less important because you have your real home. So I hope I see you somewhere, even if it's on a Zoom session. So be well. All our blessings from the monastery. Much metta karuna to all of you. So let's, as a group, let's chant Iti Piso. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vichacharana sampanno sugato lokavido anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati satta deva manusanam buddho bhagavati savakato bhagavata dhammo santi akaliko ehipasiko opanaiko pachatang vedita povinyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato savakasangho ujupatipanno bhagavato savakasangho nyayapatipanno bhagavato savakasangho samici patipanno bhagavato savakasangho yadidang chattari purisa yuga niyata purisa pukala esa bhagavato savakasangho ahunayo apahunayo dakinayo anjali karaniyo anuttarang punya ketang lokasati. Okay, how's that, Peter?
Andamayang ovadadhamma gathayo sadhu karam kadamase sadhu 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 anumodami.